Hello everyone and welcome back to Fun with History. In this video we will study the 19th century in Spain from the French occupation to the restoration of the Bourbon dynasty. As you should remember, in unit number 1 we studied the reign of Charles IV between the year 1788 and the year 1808. In October of the year 1807, Spain and France signed the Treaty of Fontainebleau that allowed France to send troops across Spain to invade Portugal, that was at that time a British ally. Spain also promised to send soldiers to the invasion, but Napoleon seized the opportunity to take control of some Spanish cities. Charles IV then abdicated in his son's favor, Ferdinand, who was the crown prince and was more popular than the king at that moment. Shortly afterwards, Napoleon invited them to Bayonne and forced them to abdicate in his brother's favor, Joseph. Joseph Napoleon was the king of Naples and Sicily since 1806 until he was crowned the king of Spain. In 1808, he tried to reform the Spanish laws with the Constitution of Bayonne. Based on the Enlightenment ideas, he introduced the separation of powers, abolished the torture, and established the freedom of press. People who supported Joseph in Spain were then called afrancesados. However, most Spanish people were conservative and hated being ruled by a foreigner, creating propaganda against him. He was also called Pepe Botella. In March of the year 1808, French soldiers occupied Madrid, and the 2nd of May, people in Madrid rebelled against the French army. The rebellion soon spread all over Spain. People formed juntas to govern in the name of the legitimate king, Ferdinand. On June the 6th, the juntas declared war on France, starting the Spanish War of Independence. In July 1808, the Spanish army defeated the French at Bailen. Britain sent then an army to help Spain, but in November, Napoleon invaded the country with more soldiers and defeated both armies. By 1809, almost all of Spain was occupied by the French. However, the guerrillas continued fighting against the invaders. In 1812, Napoleon took some of his soldiers out of Spain, giving the opportunity to the coalition of Spanish, Portuguese, and British, led by Wellington, to defeat the French in different battles, Arapiles, Vitoria, and San Marcial. That ended the French occupation. Following these victories, Napoleon recognized Ferdinand as the King of Spain and the Indies in the Treaty of Valencia, signed in the year 1813. During the war, the Junta Central Suprema, an assembly formed to claim national sovereignty that performed a double function, directed the war and promoted the convening of Cortes, established the Parliament or Cortes in Cadiz in the year 1810. Among its delegates there were absolutists and liberals who believed in the ideas of enlightenment. They abolished the manors, the guilds, the Inquisition, and established freedom of press, creating the first Spanish Constitution in 1812. This constitution recognized equality before the law and established national sovereignty and separation of powers. Absolutism then was replaced by a liberal system. However, it was conservative in some aspects. For example, Catholicism was the only religion recognized in Spain, and women weren't considered citizens. When Ferdinand came back, declared the constitution illegal. Well, let's take a look to the reign of Ferdinand VII and its different periods. With Ferdinand, Spain had to face new problems, such as a deep economic crisis. There were different reasons for this crisis. The first one was the high cost of the Napoleonic Wars. Industry, commerce, agriculture, and roads were highly affected by wars. And finally, the American Wars of Independence were really expensive and also reduced the trade between the mother country and the colonies. His reign is divided into three periods: the absolutist sexennium, the liberal triennium, and the omnibus decade. The first period started in the year 1814 and lasted until the year 1820. During this period, known as the absolutist sexennium, Ferdinand tried to restore the absolute monarchy, therefore abolished the constitution, dissolved the Cortes, and restored the privileges of the nobility and the church. He also restored the Inquisition and persecuted his opponents. Between the years 1820 and 1823, we can talk about a period known the Liberal Triennium. The General Rafael Riego started a liberal rebellion at Cabezas de San Juan, Seville, forcing the king to swear the constitution. However, the king asked the absolute powers of the Holy Alliance for help. France sent an army known as the 100,000 Sons of St. Louis to restore absolutism again. Finally, the third period, between 1823 and 1833, is known as the Omnibus Decade. This name means that it was evil or harmful, because it's characterized by the repression of the liberals. However, in 1830 the situation changed when his daughter Isabel was born, and Ferdinand then repealed the Salic law, which prevented women from inheriting the throne. Carlos Maria Isidro, the king's brother, was the inheritor until that moment, and supported by the absolutists tried to regain the throne when Ferdinand died in 1833. And what happened in Latin America at that time? At the beginning of the 19th century, Spain ruled most of Latin America. However, the criollos, white people who were born in the colonies, were particularly unhappy with the Spanish rule. The American Revolution and the spread of the Enlightenment ideas also inspired liberals to dream of establishing democratic republics, independent from the mother country. After the Battle of Trafalgar, the Spanish Navy was unable to protect the colonies. The colonies then formed their own militias to protect themselves. They refused to accept Joseph I as King of Spain and formed juntas to govern themselves. Some people wanted the juntas to be loyal to the legitimate king Ferdinand VII or the Cortes of Cadiz, while others wanted complete independence. These disagreements led to various rebellions and civil wars in the colonies. There was no Spanish army in the colonies to stop these rebellions. Let's talk about the War of Independence. Ferdinand VII's restoration of the absolute monarchy in Spain increased support for independence and led to rebellions across Spanish America, led by soldiers like Simón Bolívar, El Libertador, the first president of Gran Colombia, what is nowadays Venezuela, Ecuador, Panama, and Colombia, and José de San Martín. The wars continued for many years, but eventually most of Latin America gained independence. By 1829, Cuba and Puerto Rico were the only remaining Spanish colonies in the Americas. The independence creating new problems. The criollos, who had led the struggle for independence, wanted to control the independent states, which led to conflicts with other groups. Liberals and conservatives had very different political visions of new states. These social and political divisions led to civil wars and wars between states. The wars also made the military very powerful, while the state institutions were still weak. As a result, generals frequently took power by coups, supported by either liberals or conservatives. These generals are often called caudillos. Well, now let's take a look to the reign of Isabel II. After Ferdinand died, his eldest daughter, Isabel, inherited the crown as Isabel II. During her reign, Spain was a liberal constitutional monarchy. Sovereignty and power were shared between the monarch and the Cortes. There was very limited suffrage, only men with a lot of property had the vote. And the moderates and progressives were the two most powerful political parties. Her reign can be divided in two periods. The Regency, and her personal reign. The first period, known as the Regency, started in 1833 and lasted until the year 1843. In 1833, Isabel was only 3 years old, so for 10 years Spain was ruled by two regents. The first regent was her mother, Maria Cristina. In 1833 broke up the First Carlist War that lasted until the year 1839. In 1840, General Espartero takes over as regent. His rule is more progressive than Maria Cristina's. In 1843, when Isabel was 13, she started to rule as queen herself. Between the years 1844 and 1854, the period is known as Moderate Decade. The moderates, led by General Narvaez, increased the power of the monarchy and create the Civil War. Between 1854 and 1856, the period is known as Progressive Biennium. The progressives, led by Espartero, nationalized and sold the common lands of the municipalities and encouraged the development of the railway. The last period, between 1856 and 1858, was controlled by the Moderates and Liberal Union. General O'Donnell creates a new party called Liberal Union, with members from both the other parties, until 1868. Power alternated between the Moderates and the Liberal Union. Spain is involved in a number of foreign wars. Well, let's take a review to the Carlist Wars. Many Spanish people didn't want a female monarch. They wanted Ferdinand's younger brother, Charles, the Count of Molina, as the new king. The supporters of Isabel and Charles also wanted two different types of society. Isabel's supporters included liberals and moderate conservatives. They believed in the separation of powers and wanted to modernize the economy. The government and the towns supported Isabel. The Carlists were conservatives who wanted a traditional society based on the Catholic religion and absolute monarchy. Carlists in Navarre and Basque Country also wanted to keep their own regional laws, called fueros. They had most support among the clergy, the peasants in rural areas, and particularly northern Spain. These disagreements led to the First Carlist War between 1833 and 1839. At first, neither side had an advantage. Then, in 1835, the government started selling church land to pay the war. This helped the government to win, but the Carlists remained unhappy with the situation in Spain. They believed that Charles and his heirs were the rightful kings of Spain. This later led to two further Carlist wars in 1846 to 1849 and in 1872 to 1876. We have been talking about the two different parties, the moderates and the progressives, so now let's explain the differences. Both the moderate and the progressive parties were liberal. They opposed the absolute monarchy and supported economic reforms. However, the moderates were more conservative. The moderates gave more power to the monarch and the central government and gave fewer people the right to vote. They prioritized keeping public order. The progressives believed in popular sovereignty and gave slightly more people the right to vote. They also provided greater social freedoms. The Democratic Party, which split off from the Progressives in 1849, wanted universal male suffrage. Both parties needed the support of the army and the Queen to rule. Isabel generally supported the moderate party, so it governed during most of her reign. In 1860, the moderate government grew very unpopular. It had become less and less liberal and increasingly authoritarian and conservative. Spain was facing serious economic problems, partly because of the end of the railway boom. Isabel had always supported the moderate and rejected other political parties, so many people blamed her for the problems. Various scandals also damaged her personal reputation. Led by General Prim, the Progressive Party, the Democratic Party and the Liberal Union signed the Pact of Ostende in 1866, in which they agreed to remove the moderates and Isabel from the power. In September of the year 1868, they achieved their aims. First, the navy in Cadiz rebelled, and then, in the Battle of Alcolea, a rebel army led by General Serrano defeated the Royalist army. Isabel was forced them to exile. The supporters of the rebellion called this the Glorious Revolution. In 1869, the new government introduced the most liberal Spanish constitution of the 19th century. It recognized the principle of popular sovereignty and introduced universal suffrage for men who were over 25 years old. It said that Spain was a constitutional monarchy with separation of powers. Most power was given to the elected parliament and a council of ministers and independent courts. It recognized a number of freedoms, including freedom of religion and freedom of press. Spain was now a constitutional monarchy but without a monarch. The Italian royal family had a reputation of being liberal, so in 1870 1870, the Spanish Parliament asked Victor Emmanuel II's son, Amadeo of Savoy, to be the new king. Amadeo I immediately faced many problems. He was not accepted by the Carlists, who started the Third Carlist War. Some monarchists wanted the Bourbon dynasty to be restored. General Prim, who was his main supporter, was assassinated, and there was a rebellion against the Spanish rule in Cuba. Amadeo was unable to deal with so many problems, and in 1873 he abdicated. This led to the creation of the First Spanish Republic. The next 2 years were a period of political and social instability because there was little support for the Republic in Spain. The country also had to face a big economic crisis and various political and social disputes. In 1874, a military coup in Sagunto restored the Bourbon dynasty to the throne. Isabel's eldest son, Alfonso XII, was proclaimed king. During his reign, the Constitution of 1869 was replaced with a much more conservative constitution, which gave people fewer rights and abolished the universal suffrage. Alfonso XII's rule brought stability to Spain, and for the next 40 years, two parties took turns in governing Spain: the conservatives, who replaced the moderates, and the liberals, who had replaced the progressives. This political stability was based on a system of corrupt elections, and there was no real democracy. This led to growing tensions in society, but this is another story, another unit, and we will study it in the future. This is the end of this video. The next one, which would be about the Industrial Revolution. Bye!